Is podfading really a problem? Fighting back against music streaming manipulation, and a new book on podcasting.
Welcome to the Richard Daly Podcast, bringing you a UK perspective on the latest news and developments from the world of podcasting and internet radio.
Welcome to episode 39. I'm your host, Richard Daly. Each week I curate and discuss the latest news in podcasting and internet radio, with a focus on the smaller podcaster, radio host and DJ. There's been a lot of discussion recently about the concept of podfade. There are now over 700,000 podcasts on Apple Podcasts. According to Todd Cochran of Blueberry, about 3,000 new podcasts are being released each month. Stephen Goldstein of Amplify Media explored this in a recent article for his Blogstein newsletter. He asked Cochran how many of the 700,000 podcasts had podfaded. The answer was that only 18% of these podcasts had published an episode in the last 3 months. Now, this might seem like quite a shocking figure, but several podcast industry commentators have pointed out that, of course, there are plenty of podcasts that have ended naturally at the end of a season or for other reasons. What about if a host passes away? You know, often podcasts are very personal endeavours, and there's likely been no thought or plan for passing it on to anyone else. Tom Webster and James Cridland both point out that the percentage of television shows made in the last few years that are still being produced is probably as small, if not smaller. Another stat highlighted by Todd Cochran is that he estimates that of podcasts launched in the last year, at least half have not produced an episode in the last 3 months. Now, 2018 saw an explosion in interest in podcasting, and the ease of launching for free that new platforms provided has undoubtedly contributed to this challenge. It's clear people experimented with podcasting, with many never getting beyond their first test episode, let alone the 7 episodes that is sometimes touted as a milestone for publishing consistently. So what's the problem that these orphan podcasts cause? Well, it's probably not much of a problem really, but Goldstein feels that it clutters up the indexes and could negatively impact search, as shows are not purged from podcast listings. How would listings be purged anyway? I'm not sure how you can decide what should be removed. The only thing I've seen discussed that does make sense is to delete shows where the RSS feed does not resolve correctly, which means of course that episodes can't even be downloaded. Anna Washenko, writing for Rain News, reports that a group of music industry organisations are trying to fight against the manipulation of music streams. They've agreed a new code of practice which includes 21 points aimed at preventing people from artificially inflating streaming counts. So you might ask, why would anyone want to inflate the number of listens to their online station, or a specific artist, or even a track on a platform? Well, money, of course. Music licensing payments are based on the number of plays, so copyright holders earn more money if there are more streams. Stations may be able to attract more advertisers if they can point to higher streaming counts as well. Anna notes that methods used to manipulate counts include the use of bots, other automated processes, false accounts, and pay-for-play approaches that skew streaming counts. Rights holders who sign up to the best practice agree to support investigations into possible streaming manipulation and to take action if manipulation is discovered. Streaming services who agree to the new code will be expected to implement controls to stop data manipulation. 24 organisations have signed the code. These include Spotify, Deezer and Amazon, plus some major record labels and rights organisations. I think it's going to be interesting to see how much, if any, impact this will have on streaming numbers. It's not clear whether investigations and findings will be made public. Also, will organisations like Spotify, who pay out money based on the number of streams, want to demand money back when manipulation is discovered? I guess the answer is yes, based on their current attempts to claim back money from artists following changes to the US royalty rates. If you're looking for inspiration on how to build your podcast, I can recommend a couple of podcast interviews. Firstly, Joe Rogan sat down with Jordan B. Peterson to discuss how he got into podcasting, amongst many other things. This is an in-depth discussion lasting more than 2 hours over 2 episodes. As I said, it's not all about podcasting, as they discuss Joe's other interests before getting into the topic of podcasting. Joe talks about why he likes the longer format shows that he produces, even when people have told him he should edit them down. If you've not listened to the Joe Rogan podcast, some episodes run to more than 3 hours, and every one is getting millions of downloads. Joe and Jordan discuss this huge growth in the podcast over the 10 years that it's been running. For my second podcast recommendation this week, you may know that I'm interested in running, and especially long-distance running. One of the best podcasts on this topic is the Ultra Runner podcast. The host, Eric Scrantz, interviewed another ultra runner, Jonathan Levitt, about his podcast. They discussed choosing a format for your podcast, the technology you need, how to book guests, and how to find advertisers. If you're interested at all in distance running or ultra marathons, one of the most popular blog posts on my website is a list of what I think are some of the best podcasts on the topic. I'll put a link to that in the show notes at richarddally.com/39. Finally today, I wanted to mention a fairly new book on podcasting that I've just finished reading. Written by UK podcast producer and ex-radio presenter Chris Huskins, this 200-plus page book provides some great ideas to help you plan, build and grow your podcast. Now, I met Chris last year at a podcast meetup on the south coast of the UK. He really knows his stuff, and I recommend you pick up this book. Okay, so that's all the news from the Richard Daly podcast for this week. If you enjoyed this episode, do share it with a friend on Apple Podcasts. You can now also find this podcast on Spotify, iHeartRadio, PodSearch, and wherever else you listen to podcasts. If you visit my website at richarddally.com, you'll find all my social media links, as well as the various ways you can subscribe to the show. The show notes for this episode are at richarddally.com/39. As usual, please send me your questions or comments, and if there is a topic you'd like me to cover, then you can tweet me. As always, I really do appreciate your feedback. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode.